Welcome, everyone, to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. Tonight's topic I've wanted to cover for a long time, and now we're finally doing it. But first, we'll have to discuss the biggest story of the weekend, which is Donald Trump putting out a post on Truth Social saying he may be arrested on Tuesday, now tomorrow. We'll go through what this means and how it ties into our topic at hand, which is whether or not a revelation style one world government is in the midst of forming. So, a lot to talk about here. We're joined by first time guest, Bryce Eddy. Bryce, please tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Hey, yeah, well, when my daughters asked me one time, "Hey, Dad, what do we tell people you do for a living?" I said, "Well, just tell them I'm a many-layered onion," because I have a podcast called The Bryce Eddy Show. I also own a jujitsu school. I have a couple of other businesses. I'm on the board of Turning Point and a couple other organizations, and just no grass is growing underneath my feet.
Awesome. Well, welcome. We're glad to have you. And
Yeah,
then
thank you for having me.
back as always, regular guest of the show, regular co-host Michael Aper, and celebrating his birthday, Michael Aper.
Hello, friends. I'm 28 years young and I love Jesus, and I want to see our culture look more like him.
Awesome.
Amen.
Well, good evening, Larry, and hello, Zach. We appreciate you jumping into the chat. We're going to go ahead and dive into our first story here. So, this is actually from notthebee.com. So, former President Trump says he will be arrested this Tuesday and is calling for protests. He posted this to Truth Social. Now, illegal leaks from a corrupt and highly political Manhattan district attorney's office. You're welcome for the Trump voice. I won't do the whole thing in the Trump voice unless you guys want me to. Which has allowed new records to be set in violent crime and whose leader is funded by George Soros, indicate that with no crime being able to be proven based on an old and fully debunked by numerous other prosecutors fairy tale, the far and away leading Republican candidate and former president of the United States of America will be arrested on Tuesday of next week. Protest, take our nation back. The Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, has been investigating Trump's alleged $130,000 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels during his successful 2016 run for president. Just before Trump posted the above bombshell, Elon Musk opined on Twitter that if Trump were to be arrested, he would win the 2024 election by a landslide. So obviously there's a whole lot there to unpack, but Bryce, we'll go ahead and go to you for your initial reaction to this story.
Yeah, so I get accused of being a MAGA, ultra MAGA Trumper all the time, but I actually did not vote top of. Uh, I was obviously didn't vote for Hillary, but I've never been particularly a super Trump guy. I was really surprised and grateful as to how conservatively he governed and what he accomplished, and I think he turned out to be a great president. And so certainly I voted for him the second time around. I will go all in for him now if they arrest him. The charges that they are going after him for are number one, it's really a misdemeanor. For them, if they perp walk him for something like this, it really might just break our whole system at this point. And I think it's a setting up obviously a dangerous precedent for the future because we're unique here in America in that we weren't a banana republic and we weren't doing this to our political opponents and we weren't, arresting the last guys. There was a lot of things that we actually would overlook from administration to administration, and clearly from Clinton to Obama. I mean, Obama missiled or drone struck a 16-year-old American citizen kid. There's all kinds of things that had we chose to go after them for, they could have been held accountable, and we didn't.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I know that you've been incredibly busy with learning Greek and many other intense studies in your seminary courses, but did you even hear about this story with Trump?
Not in extreme detail, in passing, like I think the average viewer probably has, and I guess it's such an interesting situation because, like Elon says, if he gets incarcerated or whatever, then yeah, that's going to put him on such a pedestal for people to make a martyr out of him in their own political gain in that regard. But it's so absurd to me that there's still people who want him to be arrested just for the sake of getting him arrested, that he is still such a villain that that is a necessary measure. And maybe it is because they're afraid he's going to come back in 24 and be reelected, but making a martyr out of him is only going to strengthen his cause. So I guess I don't understand what the benefit is for people who would want him to be arrested, this particularly in this grounds, because it doesn't carry much weight. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Bryce, if he were to be arrested, what do you think the result would be in terms of just public attention? I mean, you already indicated that you think that this is going to definitely launch him into at least the GOP nomination. But what do you think that's going to look like socially, just in terms of, I mean, we're talking about tomorrow. It could happen tomorrow if, if there's any truth in what Trump's saying. There's a lot of rumors around it, a lot of speculation. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I we'll see what tomorrow brings, of course, because there's a chance that they walk back, those indications. And again, it came from some leaks internally in that office that this was going to happen. The actual Manhattan's DA office is in complete chaos and turmoil, with the majority of the district attorney's office not wanting this to happen. So there's a lot of resistance, even with law enforcement and all that. I think they all think and know that this is a bridge too far. I believe, and again, the predictions business is really tough, but I do believe that this will galvanize his base, and this will get a lot of people fired up in a way that no other election has in the past. Now that could work on both sides, but I think that the people who love Trump ultimately, and the people who love America, outweigh the far left that animated Biden's election, and so I think that we'll see a big difference this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're probably right about that. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of factors going on right now. I feel like we live in such crazy times that, between now and when even the primary election, let alone the general election happens, man, it's just like we're decades away in terms of politics, which is just nuts. But that's just the speed of things moving right now. I wanted to go to a couple of quick chats here. Larry Linton says the arrest is needed by the left to get another January 6th type of event. That narrative, J6, is falling apart, so they need something more to pin the crazy title on conservatives.
Yeah, Larry's not wrong, if I can comment on that. And that's why, this could be a dangerous situation. Now, January 6th, I mean, the truth that is, it was a great exaggeration, of course. And they, after the tapes have been released, and some of what, like, Tucker Carlson is exposed, and some of the egregious human rights violations that we've committed against those J6 prisoners, I think they need something to galvanize their side. And so if they're betting on people losing their minds again, that's a pretty good bet, because we could have violence, and we could have chaos again because of this. New York, if you were in doubt that it was going to happen tomorrow, or that they were planning it, New York is already setting up barricades. And so there's an indication that they believe something's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's never a good sign, because that's the type of barricading that they always set up in the summer of love 2020. So we knew something was going to go down when we saw barricades going up in downtown Portland and places like that. But I wanted to go ahead and bring in also, well, we don't have time to fully chase this rabbit trail, but Zach Hall, he does say he belongs in jail, but not for hush payments. He belongs in jail for war crimes, along with Hillary, Obama, and Bush. So, Bryce, I don't know if you have a response to that.
Well, that's a pretty broad term there. I'm not sure what Zach's necessarily talking about. You know, we'd have to have Zach here to debate it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know Zach is our libertarian anarchist, so I'm sure he's got some strong opinions there. So Zach, feel free to keep sending them into the chat. We appreciate it. Larry also said Fifth and Sixth Amendment violations that are still in progress with no outcry, even from so-called Republicans.
Absolutely. Once again, he's correct on that. And now there are some Republicans that are fighting this. Of course, you have the Marjorie Taylor Greens, you have the Thomas Masseys, you have some honest members in our Congress. But I say this on my show all the time. I mean, we have a uniparty, we have an establishment party that exists to accumulate power for themselves, and we've been seeing them in action. And I can't stand how far we've fallen. Again, I'm very skeptical or pessimistic, I should say, about politicians, even those that are, signing up to run your local HOA. I think there's a little seed of evil there that the higher you go up the chain, the more that gets fed.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And just so you guys know, in the chat, I will be kind of throwing some of your chats up on screen. We won't be able to read all of them, or else we'll be here all night, but feel free to keep sending them in. And if it's something that we can riff off of, we'll definitely go to that. But I did want to kind of go to our main topic at hand, which, I mean, it all relates, because this is ultimately a matter of, many are seeing this potential arrest of Donald Trump as being a abuse of government power. We're going to talk a lot about what it looks like for governments to enact their own laws and play God, so to speak. And so that brings us to our main topic at hand for the night, which is the World Economic Forum and what we call the Great Reset. So for those of you who may be new to this concept, I have not done I have not done an episode covering this topic yet, because I wanted to make sure I did this justice. And I know, Bryce, the motto of your show is, in fact, I'll go ahead and let you say it, but
I'd say that we're working hard to be a threat to the Great Reset. And that includes really what the WEF is trying to do to us.
Yeah. And so for those who don't know, the Great Reset is an agenda that will let their own words do the talking of what this agenda is. So this is actually a video that they put out in the midst of 2020, probably at the beginning of COVID lockdowns, if I remember right, or shortly thereafter. And they eventually had to take it down due to public backlash. But luckily, the internet is forever. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and play this sucker. 8 predictions for the world in 2030. You will own nothing and you'll be happy. Whatever you want, you'll rent, and it'll be delivered by drone. The US won't be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. Number 3, you won't die waiting for an organ donor, We will transplant organs. We won't transplant organs, we'll print new ones instead. Number 4, you'll eat much less meat. An occasional treat, not a staple, for the good of the environment and our health. Number 5, a billion people will be displaced by climate change. We'll have to do a better job at welcoming and integrating refugees. 6, polluters will have to pay to emit carbon dioxide. There will be a global price on carbon. This will help make fossil fuels history. 7, you could be preparing to go to Mars. Scientists will have worked out how to keep you healthy in space, the start of a journey to find alien life. 8, Western values will have been tested to the breaking point. Checks and balances that underpin our democracies must not be forgotten. So those are their predictions for the world in 2030. So Bryce, I'll go ahead and let you give your initial response to that video as well. Maybe we can start to unpack some of those points together.
Yeah, so here's where even Zach and our anarchists should join us. All of our um, oars should be in the water rowing at the same time. So we are in a battle against a great corporate oligarchy that is really controlling the governments around the world, and it's this globalist group of elites. And that's really, what the World Economic Forum is talking about when they say things like, you will own nothing and be happy. They aren't including themselves in the owning nothing part of it. What they're saying is we're going to own all of it. And they're the ones that are, pushing the entirety of this narrative and pushing all of these things on us that we don't want to voluntarily go into. I mean, that's the real egregious crime here, is that these people are attempting to, at worldwide scale, control all of our lives. People like Noah Yuval Harari, who is, a writer, Jewish guy that is a gay Jewish guy that has actually completely abandoned his Judeo-Christian underpinnings or values and all that we, I think, at least in this little group here, espouse. But one of the things that he said is that um, he said that we have moved past the God of the Bible. And what he talks about is that he believes that, we're now the gods, and through science and technology and all that stuff, we're going to forge a new world. But in order to forge a new world, you have to break the one that we have, and that's what they're attempting to do. And so where we all need to be united is we need to be united together against these forces. Our current political class and all that are in many respects just pawns in this bigger play. And that's why they've divided us so much. That's why everything's so polarizing right now.
Yeah. Michael, what was your initial reaction to that video? Have you actually seen that video? Because I know you
Yeah.
kind of learned about it a bit late, but that video was scrubbed from a lot of their sites. So
My first encounter with it was reading an article quoting it, and then just this week seeing it in preparation for this for the first time. But there's a handful of things that I would highlight that I think are interesting. That the US won't be the world power, but a number of countries will, quote, dominate. Dominate
Right.
seems like an interesting word choice. Also, I think it's an interesting contradiction that will print organs for transplants, but you'll have to eat less meat, because viable organs can be printed for human bodies, but viable resources can't be printed for human nourishment. That's just a fascinating contradiction to my mind. And then the biggest one I think that's fascinating is that 1 billion people will be displaced due to climate change. What does displaced mean? I mean, these are all the things that are why it was taken down to begin with. It's why people are putting on their tinfoil hats in response to this sort of thing. But to have a grounded approach and mentality concerning the realities of what the world is moving towards, and even like Bryce was talking about, this Jewish guy or pseudo-Jewish guy saying that we don't need God. Isn't that just Nietzsche all over again, saying God is dead and we've killed him? But now we're in the next step where we are God. We don't need God because we are God. It's a neo postmodern modernity that is taking shape in a weird economic perspective for how the world should be operating.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's maybe unpack point by point where we're at with these predictions that they've made, what we can maybe be doing about them. But first, let's kind of diagnose the problem, and then maybe once we've diagnosed the problem, we can talk through some solutions. But before we do any of that, Bryce, can you maybe lay the groundwork for why Christians should even care about this cabal, we'll say, creating this 2030 agenda and why we should even be involved in this at all?
Yeah, sure. So first, you got to remember that the idea of nations is straight out of the Bible, right? So what one of the things that they're doing here is they're working to create a modern day Tower of Babel. And this is what they're essentially talking about. We need to all come together, and they want to erase sovereignty. 2020 was the real, I think, exposure of the attack against our sovereignty. Not only do we need sovereign nations, but during 2020, our very lives were attacked. We should be sovereign, over our own human bodies, and yet, we had these vaccines, being mandated, the lockdowns being mandated, all those sort of things. The attacks right now on our families are all about sovereignty. Our family, that's the smallest form of government that we have. And it's the most important form of government that we have. So all of this is counter to our Christian faith and counter to what God commands and what God has us to be doing.
Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
No, it's pretty concise. I mean, we have played with the idea of what people would like to call Christian nationalism before, and it's important to recognize that this is not a topic of Christians being overtly political in a way that they want a theocracy. Like, I think a lot of people think that Christian nationalists would go toward. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Bryce is saying. It's interesting because we can look at it through the perspective of the media that we obtain and the media that we consume, and we can look at it through a context of Scripture and what we're guaranteed on the cyclical nature of history, but also what prophecy and what Scripture has promised for the future as well. So, yeah. I'm not sure what else to say beyond that. I mean, we could go in a few different directions here.
Of course. Well, then let's go ahead and just go through their list. So 8 predictions for 2030. Number 1, you'll own nothing and be happy. You'll rent and everything will be delivered to you by drone. That's their first prediction. So a lot of things stand out to me on that. First and foremost, the fact that home ownership is actually down at a all-time low. I believe new home buyers now make up the smallest percentage in the market that they've ever made up. I think it's only 26% of the market is new home buyers, and it's usually larger than that. I could be off on the numbers. I'm just going off of memory here, but I do know for sure that new home buyers are the smallest percentage that they have ever been. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that really we could say fall into this category of you will rent and you will own nothing and be happy. You know, how many people get rid of their DVDs when they get, a Netflix subscription or a Disney Plus subscription? And what's interesting to me is just what other creative things they're going to come up with that we are going to rent. But I don't know if you have anything to add to that, guys.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's interesting. They're talking about a lot of the car companies will actually reduce the price of the car, but charge you to use your seat heaters and other things that are inherent within the car. And there's actually subscription services that are starting to be looked at over a bunch of different industries and a bunch of different things that we've always kind of just taken for granted. They're reimagining all of this, and going back to that "you'll own nothing and be happy" concept. I'll quote Noah Yuval Harari again, where he says that what are we going to do with all of these useless people? And his question was because he's imagining in the future, so many people will have nothing to do because we've engineered society to the point that, you won't have truck drivers any longer, and you won't have, fast food workers, and you won't have this, you won't have that. And so it'll just be the elite class and then all of the useful idiots down at the bottom. And so his conclusion was, I think it will be a combination of drugs and video games. So they're thinking in those terms. When they are also at the same time, you talk about housing prices. Think about vacations. Think about what it takes now in terms of the cost to fly and stay somewhere in a big vacation. Things that were very accessible to the middle class now are not. And that's becoming increasingly the case as they absolutely decimate the middle class, pushing them down to the servant class, which is the goal, so that only the elites get to go to the nice places. And literally that's the world that they're imagining right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Number 2 is the US won't be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. And I appreciate, Michael, that you highlighted that word dominate. My initial thought was which countries, because I immediately am thinking, okay, well, we know that many countries have many different values that we do not necessarily endorse. Is China going to be one of those main countries? Or even Russia? There's a lot of talk about Russia right now, and Putin's supposed to be the next Hitler, according to some in the media. So it's like, are we going to pretend that America and China and Russia and some of these countries can cohabitate on the world stage as equals, with their visions that they would cast for the world being so dynamically opposing of one another? Just a thought. But number 3, you won't die waiting for an organ donor. We will print new ones. So I don't know about you guys. I don't have a huge issue with this, other than I immediately think, okay, well, how are they going to determine who gets who is privileged to get these new medical breakthroughs? That's what I immediately go to.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're going to save it for any of us.
Yeah, I'm sure not.
I'd be interested to know if the tissues that are being manufactured are brought about ethically.
Yeah,
That's
good point.
That, I think, is more of a concern than the accessibility, because even now transplant lists are biased. So the accessibility has always been an issue. But if we're going to start manufacturing human tissue, or supposed human tissue, how many fetuses are going to be harvested to make this happen? I mean, that's an extreme perspective, but by what means are we going to create human organs that are functioning, and to what extent are we going to be manipulating biology to do so?
Yeah, exactly. So number 4, talking about that train of thought of biology, you'll eat less meat, an occasional treat, not a staple, for the good of the environment and our health. So, Bryce, is eating meat really unhealthy?
No, but of course they, whenever you're arguing with a vegan or someone who's in that religious camp, and by the way, for many it really is a religion. Um, they'll compare McDonald's level low quality meat to what they're doing, and if you're getting rid of those things in your diet, for sure, good on you. Don't eat fast food. Don't eat trash junk meat. But if you're eating healthy, sustainable, happy cows, and happy meat, you are very healthy, and there is no good evidence otherwise. And that's why half the vegans I know's hair is falling out, and the dudes are built like sticks. There is a heroic efforts that you have to go through in order to get enough nutrition on a vegan diet. And so I simply just use that as the rule. If it's something that we could not have done successfully a few hundred years ago because we didn't have access to the rare coral or algae out in the middle of the ocean that we could take in a pill form to make up for the loss of some nutrients that we can't get otherwise. I just don't think God intended us to do that. He created us as omnivores. And I think a balanced diet, which does include some good vegetables, is a wonderful thing. But the whole reason they're doing that is, again, you won't eat meat. they're going to have a blast eating their Wagyu beef, specially cultivated for them. All of these folks at the World Economic Forum in Davos, when they meet, there is steak dinner after steak dinner after steak dinner. So these folks are not interested in you being able to partake in what they do.
Yep. We have in the chat, Zach said, I remember reading somewhere that Nicole Kidman was at the World Economic Forum advocating for eating bugs.
Oh, she did it in a commercial.
Did
I mean,
she?
that's yeah, no, and they really do want us to eat insects. They're investing in this right now. They're investing in manufacturing facilities for crickets and cricket protein, and yeah, absolutely. Nicole Kidman in a commercial is eating bugs, and looking bizarre at the same time. By the way, whatever that woman's been swallowed up by, it's got to be demonic.
What are you talking about, Bryce? I see here from only today, Utah school assignment has kids eat Z bugs because cows are killing the world. That's from Not the Bee.
Yeah,
So
well,
that's actually happening currently. It says a middle school in Utah's Nebo School District gave sixth grade students disgusting insects to eat last week as part of an English assignment on climate change, claiming it would save the environment from cows, which were killing the world, according to a mom who spoke with Fox News Digital. Middle schoolers loved the ew factor. Many of them gave bugs a try, and even a few staff members. Many thanks to our English teachers for creating fun and engaging lessons, the Spring Canyon Middle School said about the March 7 assignment. So, first of all, get your kids out of that school district. So, that's where my first thought goes to. But
well, let me just say two quick things. So first, look, our modern factory farming techniques, where they're abusing cows and abusing animals, and creating unhealthy meat in those facilities. Obviously, we can do better than that, and we should be against that. And I am for you eating less of that crap. But and by the way, Good Ranchers, text code Bryce, okay, because they're one of my favorite sponsors. But they're sourcing meat from all over the country in small family farms and small outfits that aren't doing that. So we do have good, sustainably resourced meat. That is possible, and it's possible for us to feed ourselves that way. But when they are saying that it's better for the environment to eat the vegetables and all of that, they are not only are they murdering millions of living creatures in order to do that large scale type farming. They are not sustainable in the way that they say, and just again, it's not it's for them to continue on in their lifestyles and for us to be cut out of it.
yeah. And what I find interesting too is they talk about how it's better for the environment. And then that article that I pulled up about Utah, it said that cows are hurting the environment. And what's really unfortunate is that could not be further from the truth. In fact, there's a lot of research that has shown that that specifically the U.S. has actually gotten a lot of damage from the loss of mass herds of buffalo that used to roam native to the land. And just if you don't know, I don't have time to get into everything, but find you some Joel Salatin videos or some Justin Rode videos. Start watching those, binge watch them if you want, even, because they're going to help you to learn how to be more sufficient food wise. But beyond that, they talk all about the practicality of proper farm food. But beyond that, it's regenerative farming. So actually the soil that we use in our modern farming techniques is actually our techniques basically slowly erode our soil,
Yep.
which is actually making, I will give some credit where credit is due, that does affect the climate. It affects how the climate affects the ground, for example, like a lot of the flooding that you see in California, mudslides, things like that. That's a result of the soil actually having no nutrients in it that actually causes the soil to absorb water and hold water like a sponge. Instead, it just becomes a giant mud puddle. But regenerative farming is actually a type of farming style that is decentralized, which we love, and it actually adds to the soil. So that's a whole tangent that we won't be able to fully explore tonight. But Joel Salatin, Justin Rhodes, John Moody, some of those guys, you can definitely learn a lot from them. So in which this kind of goes into our next point. 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. We must be welcoming to integrating refugees. So I don't know about you, but it seems like whether we want it or not, that's already being thrusted upon us as a nation. We've got an open border that has thousands of refugees coming across it, and that could be for electoral purposes, or it could be for many nefarious purposes, actually. I think cartels are gaining a lot from that. But number 6 says polluters will have to pay to emit carbon dioxide. Global price on carbon make fossil fuels history.
Yeah. So, hey, I'll try not to talk on every single one of these or comment on everyone, but I do want to go back to the billion people being displaced because I think there's a school children's idea that they've created, or a Hollywood idea, like, that there's been a few movies that are climate catastrophes where all of a sudden it happens all at once, and there's flooding, and homes are being crushed through, and a bunch of those sort of things that are occurring in these fantasy dystopian hellscape films. And the truth is if the climate changes a little bit and it gets warmer by a couple of degrees, a few degrees, what happens is people will move north. There's a lot of inhospitable places like the Great White North of Canada and other places that actually become warmer. And so, we're talking what ends up being hundreds of years that they're talking about, that maybe some of our coastal cities will be overrun. Again, this is if you believe in some of their models, but yet they're playing that game, that people are going to suddenly have no place to live and they're going to be displaced by these things. And none of that is really true.
Yeah. Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Well, we'll move on to the last one, and probably the one that we could hang at for a moment here. Western values will be tested to the breaking point. Checks and balances that underpin our democracies must not be forgotten. So, Michael, any idea what Western values are?
Depends on who you ask, right? There's many who think that Western values are elitism and colonization and selfishness, a lot of those sort of things. From a religious perspective, it's all about evangelism and whatever. But I think agreed upon ideas that we could say are Western philosophies are those pursuing progress. I'd say progressiveness is Western in nature. One of the larger ways, and this is a generalization, but a big cultural difference between the West and Eastern philosophies is that the West says oftentimes the newest thing is the best thing, whereas Eastern philosophies will say the oldest thing is the best thing, meaning for like argumentative purposes, to cite something that is an older idea would be of a greater value. So as that could be applied here, what's I think funny to me about the attack against the West in this is that it is a Western philosophy at its heart. At least that's what it seems to me. But it's a skewering of this progressivism that once made the West really innovative and now is regressing into a somewhat destructive tendency. And that's kind of the whole theme of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Bryce, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So when we say Western values, I think it's important to define that. And really what it is it's the unique blend of, kind of the Greek philosophy combined with Judeo-Christian understanding of the world. And it was the kind of marriage of all of that intersected into kind of creating what we had. Our founding fathers, but not just them, because of course, Western values means even, what England had, and and really that whole commonality of what we have here when we say the West. And one of the things that we've fallen into a trap of doing is forgetting that it is Western values that won. Okay, good ideas win, right? Good cultural ideas win. The reason that we're probably all sitting here wearing blue jeans is because jeans are really great, right? They were invented and they rose to culture. The reason I love tacos and burritos and Mexican food is because it is awesome. Okay, it wins, right? So you have all these things that come up from various cultures that win. And the truth is, Western culture has reigned supreme, and it created the most prosperity the world has ever known. It really created the most peace the world has ever known. We had a tremendous respite from really horrific times that were more common here for the last couple hundred years as Christians. We've been we haven't had the persecution or the prosecution that other Christians have had worldwide over. Now, however, I think Western values have been lost. I think that we're in the waning days of Western values being supreme. They're being attacked. Or the generations that are coming up right now have essentially disowned many of those things, and that's why we're in the chaos that we're in. And I don't think it's going to stop. I think until we figure it all out, and until we win again, we're going to be in a world of hurt, and Christians here in this country are going to be persecuted and prosecuted.
Yeah. So I tend to agree with you, especially the idea that many individuals are currently rejecting those foundations that we were built upon. So let's maybe talk a bit about how this agenda is being rolled out, because I think it's really easy to read the points of the agenda and talk through each of these things, make observations about what's happening, but talking about how it's being enacted, and then maybe a little bit of what we can do about it is the most crucial thing. So one of the biggest things that I think is a big driver for this agenda is ESGs. So, Bryce, would you be able to give us kind of a working definition of ESG?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's what is it? Economic, social,
Environmental, social governance.
yeah. Thank you. I always forget the acronym, but I say ESG so many times I should remember it. But really, it's a new way of measuring things at a social credit score for the corporations that we're dealing with. We just recently, with the SVB Bank falling to pieces, they had incredibly high ESG scores, and they were investing in companies that had incredibly high ESG scores. And so it's really that is the dominating way that you measure merit in society now. Is do these things give a nod to all of those categories? Are you appropriately woke enough? Are you appropriately on the side of this corporate oligarchy? And do you have a diverse enough staff? And all of those sort of things are what it's play. And it is that first step towards having a Chinese style social credit score system for us as individuals.
Yeah. And that social credit score. So what are the implications of a social credit score?
I'll give you a real life example that does come from China. So I own a jujitsu school. I think I'm going to say at the beginning. So I'm a mixed martial artist, and there was a mixed martial artist who went and challenged all of the traditional Chinese martial artists around the country. And he went on this tour, and you can look up some of these videos on YouTube where he would challenge a classic, kung fu guy, beat him down pretty severely, just to show that mixed martial arts where it's at, right? And this guy became famous. And then the Chinese government got ticked off at him, and they decided that, he had humiliated all of their traditional martial arts, so they were shutting him down. So they didn't throw him in jail, but what they did do was make sure that he couldn't access the high-speed trains. He couldn't get food out of any of the vending machines, and over in China, that's a big deal, right? Half of the food you eat, you go to these little kiosks and things. He couldn't access the normal things in the stream of commerce that you and I, could access, or a normal human being. So they shut him down. So that's what they could do to us with this, and that's why I think, and I know we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, is the CBDC, digital bank coins, things like that, where they can just turn the switch on you, turn it off, and or not let you buy certain things. All of that can happen here very quickly.
Like you can't buy or sell unless you have a certain.
Yeah, and this guy, by the way, this Chinese guy, there's a video of him crying and apologizing to the Chinese government for being, bad, and begging that they let him back into the mainstream of society.
Yeah, my goodness.
It's
And
important to
unfortunately, it's coming. Go ahead, Michael.
It's important to realize that this isn't sci-fi. We like to think that this is something that we got to be careful, or this is going to be the future. Well, no, it's not really the future. We have all the technology necessary already, and it's taking place. And in theory, just like socialism, in theory, it works. The problem is moral relativity. How can one person decide for another what is good when they're biased against them for their own gains? And that's kind of what you're saying about this instance with the martial artists. But say we're rejected the ability to act upon something that is within our freedoms because someone decided that our freedoms should not be extended to us the same way we think they should be. We saw that during COVID, where you're no longer free to go outside after a certain time. You're no longer free to participate in commerce unless you have a mask on or unless you've been vaccinated appropriately. And that is a conflict of morality for many. It's a conflict of freedom and justice for others. And then you've got people like Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, screw your freedoms.
Screw your freedom.
Yeah. So
gotta get that
is that our
inflection in there.
response? He's setting an example from a fairly influential perspective, and he's one of many, of course. But the sooner we screw our freedoms, we'll get exactly what we ask for.
Yeah, we already have a measure of it here. I mean, it exists. One of the businesses I'm associated with, when we went to buy our building, we were shadow banned by a large bank because we had guns on our website. And we're a vocational training school for military vets, right? We had some bank accounts shut down recently and had to scramble to get access to the funds because they did not like one bank did not like our risk profile anymore. Out of the blue, a bank that we were doing business with for 20 plus years. And their reason was they didn't like some of our transactions. And nothing illegal, not even remotely illegal, but it was the fact that, we're fairly outspoken. We have a 30-foot tall American flag in our facility. We were down on the border. In fact, you can watch Border Battle on Salem Now. We're featured in it. We were embedded with the sheriff's departments down there. And so because we're conservative, we got attacked, and again, no fraud, nothing untoward, everything above board, everything legal. They just one day said, we don't want to do business with you, without a letter, without notice. Just we discovered because the gas cards for the cars weren't working, and we do $50,000 a month in gasoline for our patrol vehicles.
In the chat, Zach said, I get asked about ESG all the time at my day job. He works in finance, usually by people who heard about it from Alex Jones with little to, I'm assuming you meant little to no research of their own. And then Larry Linton said, you will own nothing because you don't have any money to buy it, or a poor ESG score where banks won't lend you the money, digital or otherwise. We're definitely going to be talking about that. And real quick,
Once again, Larry's right.
Yep. Larry's on a roll
And
tonight.
so is Zach, because that's right. Our hope is in Christ, and that's absolutely where it should be.
Absolutely. But we do have to talk about what we do while we are occupying until he comes. So I do want to go ahead and play this video here. This is something that's going on in Tennessee, talking all about centralized digital currency. So let me just make sure I've got the sound up for this, and hopefully you guys can hear it.
Close. It is the Money Transmission Modernization Act. It's being pushed by the Conference of State Bank Supervisors, the CSBS. And, this is, again, it's hard for me to say. I'm not saying this is necessarily nefarious intent. This is a 501c3 organization, and they are involved in licensing mortgage transactions across the country. If you've ever seen that NLMS license number, whenever you deal with a mortgage broker, they all got to have that license number. That partially runs through the CSBS. They set that system up. So we're already sort of utilizing some of this, right? Nonetheless, there is they proposed this bill back in 2021 to modernize the way we transact, and wouldn't you know it, that bill is right here in Tennessee now in 2023, and I'm just finding this today. It's already passed the Senate. So the Money Transition Modernization Act has already passed the Senate here in Tennessee. It's already passed, let's look at the House side. It has already passed the Commerce Committee. It's already passed the Government Operations Committee. It is now on to Finance, Ways, and Means. And if it passes Finance, Ways, and Means, it will be on its way to the House floor and on its way to the governor's desk. And what are some things that you and I may want to be concerned about in this 60-page bill in modernizing our money transactions? Well, I got to tell you, there's one glaring thing that I'm concerned about, and it's this definition of money. Now, it's not as if this is new, because when you read this, you can think, well, yeah, there is the euro, out there across the pond. But look at this definition here of money. Includes a monetary unit of account established by an intergovernmental organization or by an agreement between two or more governments. And so we're not talking about someone else's. For example, money, the original definition, money means a medium of exchange that is authorized or adopted by the United States or issued by a foreign government. So it's one thing to have our national currency and then through an exchange process accept a foreign currency, right? But that's not what the second part of this definition says. We're not talking about foreign currency. We're talking about a new currency, an international currency, an intergovernmental currency, right? Agreed upon by two or more governments that actually becomes a legitimate currency. Okay, so that's different. That's a whole new type of New World Order currency. And we're about to add that definition, okay, as to what money is in the state of Tennessee. And that doesn't mean that right now we're coming under the New World Order and the central bank. But nonetheless, I just want to point out that these bills that are running through our legislature right now, in my humble opinion, are beginning to set the table of what we've all been talking about. A one world government, a structure where we all have the same currency and we come under the auspices of the central bank. We lose our autonomy, all of it. And it's not that we shouldn't be taking a look at these regulations. It's that a lot of folks are saying, let's just slow down a little bit and talk about this before we just send all these things to the governor's desk and open Tennessee up. Like I said earlier, we'll be the test case. We'll be the guinea pigs. When that digital money comes out, boy, Tennessee will be ready to go. Bring on the digital currency. No!
Gentlemen, your initial thoughts.
Birch Gold, guys, 989898. Text Bryce, BRYCE. That's another one of my sponsors. No, I'm well, it is one of my sponsors, but I'm teasing. Listen, when you start to see this all in the big picture, right? It sounds very conspiratorial, this one world government thing, but I think people are starting to wake up and understand how much all of this is connected. All of this is really manifestations of this goal of a new world order or a global regime controlling everything. And the terrifying thing about that is your money will no longer be your money.
It mostly already isn't.
True.
Like, very few of us have autonomy in finances. People are living in debt, and that's been the case for generations already. But now that will not only become the norm, but it'll become the only option, where you have to use this potential centralized banking. Now, what I think is interesting about that video, he says we are seeing the beginning of this. Well, I disagree. We saw the beginning of it 40, 50, 60 years ago. We are seeing the progression, the evolution of this thing that is going to slowly and surely walk us toward the so-called one world government or economic system. We're getting to a place already. We talked earlier about social credit scores, and who was it in the chat? I think Larry mentioned that because you don't have money, your poor ESG score won't allow you to be lent money. Well, we already have credit scores. Our credit score is ridiculous because even in the current system that I've never known a separate system that in my life, my ability to be successful with finances is largely perceived as my ability to borrow money effectively, not my ability to produce value or my ability to retain value in a monetary sense. I think we've had a broken, messed up economic system for a long time when it comes to imaginary money. And now we're at the point where if I want to take out a mortgage, I have to prove to the bank that I'm able to manage imaginary money better than you would think I can otherwise, rather than taking a look at my actual money. And this just gets into a whole Dave Ramsey rant in itself. Yeah. But this is the next step in the evolution of that, isn't it? And every step away from having ownership over anything or taking pride in anything is just another step towards, I don't own anything, but I'm happy about it because I don't really care as long as I get what I want. And maybe all I want is Netflix and comfortable clothes and a chair to sit in. And maybe all I want is to look like the fat, flubby people in WALL-E,
Yeah.
So, it's funny to think of that as our sci-fi future, but we can look at the extremes. But if you look through a microscope like we are in this conversation at some of these small baby steps that are stepping us one inch at a time towards something that's a lot nastier than we'd like to believe.
Yeah. Charles Cook jumped in the chat. He said, it's happening because everyone cares about Washington and watches Fox News and do not have a clue what's going on in their own state. I completely agree. And that being said, I should shout out that video came from Gary Humble of Tennessee Stands. I should make sure that I do that because they are doing some great work. So if you are interested in learning more about what's happening in Tennessee, go to Tennessee Stands to follow everything that Gary is doing. And then Zach said, your money will never be your own as long as the Federal Reserve and centralized banking exists. To which Charles replied, what I'm going to say too, which is end the Fed.
Yeah.
But yeah, Michael, you're right. It comes down to personal responsibility because, kind of what Zach and Charles were saying, the Federal Reserve is a giant issue. We don't have a lot of control of so many things in our currency. but that is where we do have to take control of the things that we can take control of. And Dave Ramsey is a great resource for that. Just some basic biblical truths of handling money. But Bryce, you were going to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to say is, we have forever, in this country, well, not forever. We have for many, many years had a semblance of liberty. But we were, many of us anyway, and I know you guys were, kind of all red-pilled during the lockdowns, when you realize that, oh, okay, we weren't as free a nation as we thought we were. And we lost that freedom little bit by little bit by little bit, going back decades. And of course, they told us they were going to do this. That's the irony, is if you paid attention, all of what's going on right now was foretold by them in their own writings. And by them, I mean these, elite oligarchy type globalist folks that wanted to see us go down a certain path. And we were busy as, wonderful people, building our businesses, doing our thing, having our kids, keeping our heads in the sand. You mentioned earlier about church and politics. And the truth is politics, the definition of it is how we organize ourselves. And the churches that decided that they weren't going to be involved in how we organize ourselves are directly responsible for a lot of what's coming soon.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a lot of what this podcast is focused on. We do a weekly show, and sometimes it's hard to know which topics to pick because so much happens in a week in the news cycle. And it's always a struggle to figure out, do we focus on something that's theological or something that's political? And sometimes the answer is yes to both. And sometimes it's just one or the other that we have to discuss as Christians so that we can be aware of what's happening in our culture and have these discussions, because unfortunately they are not happening among churched individuals in this country very often.
Amen.
Something that you said, Michael, reminded me about this other video that I wanted to go ahead and pull up really quick. This is probably the most succinct explanation of what a 15-minute city is.
What is a 15-minute city? So come on in, let me show you what a 15-minute community looks like.
Well, I'm excited to see this, Randy, because you always break things down into nice practical ways, right?
Here we go. These residents of the 15-minute community, they're not locked in, but they just stay there. They're free to come and go, but they don't. So let's take a step inside. Everything they need in their life is right here in their 15-minute community. A water bowl, a feed tray. They own nothing, but they are exceptionally happy. And you know how happy they are is by how many eggs they produce. And it's so wonderful because I get to take everything that they produce, and they just keep producing. So let me go in here. And here we go. Each of them have their own house. Now, in a 15-minute community, you don't get a lot of variation in housing. They're all pretty much the same. But we can take a look and collect their production. There's a few. There's a few more. And there we go.
And they're none the wiser.
And they're happy.
Yeah.
I get to take what they produce. They're free to come and go, but the world is so scary for them out there, they will never leave. I don't have to put a fence around them. And here we are.
It's an ideal world. I don't see anything wrong with it. Everything is provided for them. They're cared for. They're happy. They're together.
Yeah.
It's all convenient.
What? So anybody who wants to understand what a 15-minute community is, here you go. And there's only one boss. And that boss provides everything for them.
So there we have it. 15-minute cities. That made me what you said, Michael, about going to the land of Wally. That's everything that I thought of, because they have the freedom to leave, but that big world out there is so scary for them. Why would they leave? Now the question is that a biblical mindset to have? And I don't know if either of you guys want to riff on that for a moment.
I'll just say no. Yeah, no, we're called to much, much more, and part of it is the fear that they have instilled in us. And again, we saw how easily fear can manipulate during the COVID lockdowns. That's what they use to control people, and we still have people who have been debilitated by that. We still, see all over the place people walking around with masks, and still living in that mindset. And no, that is not our calling at all.
Yeah.
And you could say our calling really specifically is go and make disciples of all nations. How are we going to go? We've touched very, very briefly in the past on what the whole 15-minute city thing could have an impact on global missions. And at the time we said, yeah, we don't necessarily have to send missions from the United States to all these poor, pathetic countries that aren't the United States.
Right.
However, people need to be sent and people need to be welcomed. And if we're put in our chicken coop comfortably, we might not know what we're missing out. And the gospel is alive and well and being spread, and people are dreaming dreams, and young men are having visions. The book of Malachi is coming true before our very eyes, but we've got the blinders on too often to recognize what is taking place.
Could
Well,
you
maybe
unpack that a
we'll
little
have-
further?
Sorry?
Could you unpack that a little further about Malachi?
Yeah, I mean, Malachi, a lot of the minor prophets, I think I actually misspoke. It's Joel that I was quoting that says, the young men will dream dreams, older men will have visions, and this is like a sign of the coming day of the Lord, the great and horrible day of the Lord that is coming. And eschatologically, which just means as we have a belief about the end times, we have a lot of different signs that we like to draw upon. You could even think of, from a more commonly preached Christian perspective, Mark 13, Jesus gives us all these lists of false prophets and false teachers and hardships and struggles that the disciples will go through. And he says specifically, these are just the birthing pains. And I want to say, a lot of people like to say that and say, oh, it's a sign of the times. The end is near. Well, yes and no. Because Jesus says it's the beginning of birthing pains. And I bet most women who have gone through the birthing process, when they begin feeling birthing pains, that doesn't mean the baby's coming.
Right.
It means they're just getting started. And I think that's closer to the position that we're in accordance to Christ's words to us, specifically in Mark 13, where there are signs of what is to come. The Holy Spirit is alive and well, and he is working in his people. Oftentimes we like to think, I mean, especially in the church and among people who consider themselves devout Christians, we like to think that we're Elijah on the hillside saying, oh God, you might as well kill me because I'm the only faithful one left that calls upon your name. And God says, no, I tell you what, I've got thousands of other faithful prophets elsewhere. And I guess what I'm getting at in all this is just that when we think about this New World Order, this economic system, the 15-minute cities, yes, they are signs of where we are in time and in our position with Christ. But I want to be encouraged, and even kind of what Zach was saying is Jesus is coming soon. Yes. And yet, if Jesus doesn't come in our lifetime, we still have immense reason for hope. We are justified by grace through faith, and the living God has died on our behalf. And we live in a world and in a covenant where we can experience the Holy Spirit living within us in the midst of struggle and in the midst of trouble. And we can call upon the Lord to be educated in a meaningful way on how to handle these things. You know, maybe the Bible doesn't give specific instruction on 3D printed organs,
Right.
but we've got a good source of ethics and what we can hold as a standard for our lives. And I'd really like to see a faithful few hold on to that, and even a faithful majority hold on to that if it were possible. But despite it all, hell or high water, we're going to be faithful in the midst of it. I know I speak for myself at least, and I think I can speak for you guys as well.
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bryce, I want to kind of expand upon the encouragement that Michael's given the audience, because this World Economic Forum, this Davos group, the Agenda 2030, whatever you want to refer to them as, it blackpills a lot of people. It really does make people feel powerless, helpless, frustrated. I also think some people like to use eschatology as a way to not do anything. So could you maybe give us some encouragement and maybe some practical ways that we can be living life boldly, so that, as your slogan is so well put, we are a threat to the Great Reset?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, look, there's a lot of reasons to be despondent if you are looking at what's happening, right? But that's a lot of it's because we grew up in this framing of just this amazing country that, we got to enjoy. And that is not the reality of the most of history. And, I talk to people right now that are, concerned, young folks just getting married. They're concerned about bringing kids into this world and things like that. And that's actually how we win, right? We win by being faithful to what God has told us, which is to be fruitful and multiply. It is to go and make disciples of the nations. So we need to continue fighting. And if it is the end times and we're seeing this all happen before our very eyes, then we should count that as joy as well. But the truth is how we win. We have a saying in our business that two can fight 10. And it's really community that will be powerful for us. And that's the joy I'm finding in today. And that is that during COVID, we had this great clarifying event where you saw so many of these churches really fall. And they're still around, many of them, but they are woke and they've gone to adopting the tactic that my friend Eric Metaxas talks about in his letter to the American Church, which I think everybody should read, where the churches in the times of the Nazis just sang louder to ignore the sound of the screaming people in the trains as they went by. And we need to be strong as a community of churches who understand what's at stake. And I think that we, I've referenced a guy by the name of Peter Tertian who wrote a book called Ages of Discord, and he's a historian, scientist that studies the kind of the rhythms of history. It's called Cleodynamics, I believe. And he predicted in 2012, he wrote an article, or 2010, where he said that 2020 would be the start of the most violent decade the world has seen. And it's pretty interesting prediction given what we've seen so far and the fact that that was the beginning of the lockdowns and unrest and all that stuff. And he said the difference in this time versus history is that it will be worldwide, because of all of our technologies and everything can kind of go around the world in an instant. But what will get us out of it is, and I think this is just, again, he's identifying truth, right? I don't know about his religious underpinnings. I don't think he's a believer, but what will get us out of it is one generation departs, another generation comes in, and in this 5 to 15-year cycle of violence and upheaval, they return to some of the good principles, right? This generation coming up, which I hope is a bunch of awesome, gnarly Christians, look at this and say, no, we're going to set things back to order. You know, things tend towards entropy, and God is the God of order. And it is Christian principles and Christian communities that will be able to put it back to order.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I wanted to jump over to Revelation 21, verse 5. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. Also he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Now, I think that passage is both frightening and encouraging. And to me, the encouragement, of course, comes from that we have a heritage. He is making all things new, and we have a heritage as sons of God. But then what's interesting to me too is verse 8. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for the murderers, the fact that cowardly is actually thrown into that verse is so interesting to me, and I did not understand that until I did not understand that was in that verse. When I kind of reread that, many years later, it was kind of mind blowing to me. So, Bryce, why do you think that word in particular was included in that passage?
Well, gosh, I mean, look at what we're seeing right now. I mean, cowardice is so much of why we're in the trouble that we're in. Cowardice is one of those things that's stopping us as men from doing what we should be doing. Even in our families, cowardice is one of those things that I think is almost worse than anything with regards to what the churches have been doing here in America. I mean, look at the slide of our moral structure in America is because of cowardice in the church. I mean, there's so much of this stuff is directly attributable to that, particular value.
Yeah, Michael, anything to add to that?
At the time that John was writing this letter or this discourse, he was exiled on the island of Patmos. At a time, it's debated what the specific date is that it was penned, but regardless of the date, he was either encountering extreme opposition by Rome or extreme opposition by both Rome and the Jews. It's believed that a large portion of Revelation and the great purpose of Revelation is to give confidence and encouragement to those who are under extreme oppression. So from a closer interpretation of that text, I think it's safe to say that John is saying he's pointing out the cowardice of those who would not remain faithful. But as we see time and time again through scriptural context and through the prophetic nature of Scripture, what he is writing to the church in the first century, he is also writing to the church in the 21st century. So it holds true. I guess that's what I'm saying, is that the cowardice that we could be tempted into, not just cowardice in a political sphere, but cowardice in our faith. And like Bryce, you mentioned, the responsibility of the church in the in the public outlet, the churches have failed in a lot of ways. We failed in social aspects, but also in the way that we've responded to humanitarian issues, to COVID-19 requirements, to government outreach, to government overstep. The church has acted in cowardice many times, and we are called to stand apart from that.
Yeah, amen. Well, one of the other things that I talk on my show, you mentioned the, great being a threat to the Great Reset opening, but one of the other things that I say is that we're, trying to put the man back in mankind, and the truth is that there is such a dearth of masculinity right now, and I mean true masculinity. I mean Jesus-like masculinity. He was captain of the Lord's army. He was a fierce, masculine man. Worked with his hands, and we've painted him as a weakling in most pictures that are dominant in the Christian church today. And the truth is that so much of what's happening right now in our culture, people are terrified right now of being canceled by being bold and by speaking out on these things. We have kids being transgendered, quote unquote, by their parents in schools right now. Half of these elementary, you see it on TikTok, and the libs of TikTok, who I got to meet Chai Rachik the other day at a PragerU gala in Florida. She's a hero only by posting their own videos where they're declaring all these terrible things that they're doing to our children.
Yeah.
And when you have 50% of a classroom declaring that they're non-binary in elementary school and things like that, where are the men standing up against that stuff? Where are the men pulling their kids out of these schools and saying, okay, honey, I'll work 2 jobs if I have to make it to where you can afford that we can afford to homeschool? Where are the dudes stepping up and, marrying their girlfriends, and doing the right thing and, forging a way in our culture? We need to be coming back to those things.
Yeah.
There are too few of them, and they live in fear, stagnant fear and complacency, and usually crippling debt as well, to go back to what we were talking about to begin with.
And I'm glad you're talking about that, honestly, because, we have been so irresponsible in so many ways. I mean, so unbiblical in our treatment of money. And I'm glad you're bringing that point up, because that is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's something to be said about we need bold pastors too, who can really challenge these men, because I think men don't feel challenged in church a lot of times. And that's a big thing that I've heard, at least from several men. And I'm not going to say that it's every church. Obviously, there's great churches, and every church has their strengths and weaknesses. But Larry had said before he jumped out of the chat, he said, we need a black robe regiment.
Amen.
And that'd be something to see.
I think it's coming. So Rob McCoy, pastor, here locally, that I'm part of the church there, is the co-founder and co-chair of Turning Point, their faith division. It's called TPUSA Faith, and they're running around the country like mad. I mean, Charlie Kirk and Rob McCoy, they're spending the vast majority of their year on the road, going and speaking at a bunch of different churches and getting churches that want to stand up, and equipping them and arming them, with some of these tools. And then there's, other just amazing pastors out there that are speaking that message of masculinity, and really trying to get, men to rise, and men to have men with chests to, boldly, stand in the gap and defend our women and children against these scourges, which include abortion and, other things that are going on right now that our churches have just been silent for far too many years on.
Awesome.
Bryce, I think you need to see the statue of Jesus in Korea. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know. I may have seen it and just forgotten, but yeah.
If you're able to pull up the Korean Jesus
Sure.
statue.
Tell us about it while I get a photo pulled up.
Well, you're talking about Jesus being portrayed as a weakling. He's always he's malnourished and scrawny and pathetic looking, and the Korean Jesus, they don't like that version of Jesus, so they've got a good statue that's a little bit different. He bench pressed
Amen.
our sins and showed us the way. WHEY.
I love it. No, I mean, listen, man, that's
There we
yeah,
go.
yeah. Okay, I have seen that before. Yeah, I mean, listen, he was a strong man. We know that by his profession. We know that by the men of those times. We know that that's the case, and for us as American Christians to have portrayed him as weak for so long, I think that we made a grave mistake in moving towards this sort of friendly kumbaya style of hippie Christianity that sort of dominated our culture and feminized our men, and it's a problem. But again, there's some real bright spots out there. I'll mention TPUSA again is doing some of these, events for men, like men's conference events, where Spencer Mozinga, who's one of their security guys, has organized these events where he's putting men out in the woods and getting them to do some real hard stuff, do some real hard PT. And I think I'm going to participate in one of the events and teach some jujitsu and choke
Awesome.
some guys out in love. That sort of stuff is what we need to be doing. And I'm challenging men everywhere I find them to go and do hard things. Go learn a superpower like how to fight. Of course, I'm partial to jujitsu, but there's other things that you can do. But go lift weights, eat meat, do hard things and become hard. And then you focus on those muscles as well as your spiritual muscles, and really dedicate yourself to something else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great charge to end with. Once upon a reset said, how far can one rise when/if they are decidedly attached to a false left-right American paradigm? Well, that's a weighted question for the end of a stream, but Michael, do you want to take a quick swing at it?
The false dichotomy of our bipartisan governance is a hack that has trained us to believe that we must conform to that way of thinking. It's social conditioning that has been at play in our particular government for a long time, and it has taken the world by charge in this liberal versus conservative way of thinking, and it's wrong. We can be progressive and conservative, and in that we can find actual progress and not perceived progress. But
right.
we could unpack that for the next hour.
Well done. That was a pretty good, better answer than I could have done in such a short time. But awesome. Well, Bryce, where can people find you to keep up with everything you're doing?
Yeah, so if you want to follow my Instagram, it's Super Bryce Eddy, and if you want to follow my show, it's the Bryce Eddy Show on Rumble. We just started a new Rumble channel, so go there and subscribe to us there. We were attached to the church channel for a long time, and I'm trying to get everybody to move over to our own dedicated channel because Rumble's a little funky that way. And then if you want on all of the podcast apps, I think we're number 84 right now in political news and commentary. I'm getting some great guests, and that's one of my other than jujitsu, that's one of my superpowers is being able to pull in some awesome people. So follow me on the Bryce Eddy Show.
Awesome. Michael, where can people find you?
Well, this week I'll be dissecting Romans 5 and preparing for a Greek midterm.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for watching. We have been Forge and Anvil. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your Monday night, or if you listen back on the recording, we hope you have a great day.